It's working now. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Maria, I'll let you introduce us.
All right. Hi, and thanks very much for inviting us here. I'm very happy that we can then present our work this time virtually. So I am Maria Kallionpää. I'm a composer and pianist, and we are hopefully going to talk about one of my compositions and Hans Peter's recording of it, 6 Degrees of Freedom, in the context of future music. So what this whole concept of Zukunftsmusik is, or what it could be in nowadays perspective, and what does it mean? What kind of solutions there could be? So yeah. So what is Zukunftsmusik? So this is an old terminology from the 19th century, from the Romantic era of classical music, where it was especially popularized by composers, by some of our household composer names like Richard Wagner, but also by Franz Liszt and Schumann, for instance, and they all agreed that there should be this kind of a special, very special new kind of music, music of the future, which would be completely something else than what has been composed before. So there was this music critic who wanted to flatten this whole idea, and who was in a mocking way actually referring to such pursuits and such composers as Zukunftsmusik, but it was actually originally a derogatory term, so not a positive one. However, these composers back in the days, they decided to own it. So Wagner, for instance, used this term in his pamphlet of the same name. There is also there are some writings also by Schoenberg, in which he was also referring to this concept of the music of the future, where he is still reflecting the echoes of this concept of a romantic composer as basically as a genius who can convey something what normal people wouldn't be able to do. So in a very moderate way, he stated that that music of the future should be such that it would be music that has never heard before, that could not be composed by any kind of a person, no matter how talented, just by some kind of a genius, and so no pressures at all. I would say. So that was very that kind of a cult of genius from the Romantic era was very much demonstrated in this whole concept. But anyway, the idea was that something completely new was supposed to come out of it. Then there were also very ambitious pursuits in this field. For instance, the idea of composer Scriabin, who basically wanted to generate a composition which he called Mysterium, which unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, did never get ready, because the whole point of this was that this would be a spectacle taking place in the Himalayas, where all this humankind of presence would be wiped away with this divine kind of music and divine colors and visuals and so on, and the kind of an Übermenschen would be taking over. The better people would take over the future. However, he managed to write the very beginning of this piece, but we never really know, or we never really learned how was he really intending to implement his very ambitious plan. So that will be a mystery. Anyway, that's about the past. So now then there were some other people who took this idea also seriously later on, like for instance Luigi Russolo, who wrote his manifesto of noises, the art of noise, in 1913, in which he argued that any kind of sounds should be regarded as music. So for that he actually himself built up machines called intona rumori that were experimental instruments. there were around 27 versions of them, and they were basically just to make some noise. Okay, let's get a bit further. So later on, of course, the development has taken a more abstract turn. For instance, by a couple of researchers like Charape, who for instance argued that it was one of the most important parts in the development of music history, that the sounds were no longer connected to any kind of instruments or human expression per se, or any kind of a physical activity on an instrument. So basically, music became much more wide of a concept, and also we would be opened up to all sounds. Also, the idea of form was challenged, for instance, by starting to prioritize the idea of musical piece as a process instead of an object. So basically, what were the original ideas of Zukunftsmusik? So basically, to completely renew music, both aesthetically but also technically. However, originally they didn't really offer us any kind of actual ideas of implementation, so how to do it. So it was more like a philosophical concept. And also composers themselves had lots of explorations. They tried to actively contribute to the direction of this kind of a new music development. If we think about nowadays, or if we reflect nowadays stylistic attempts or stylistic pursuits, we would say that we don't have any kind of a particular style right now. Everybody wants to create something new, but basically we have this kind of an pluralism. So there are many kind of styles to approach this concept. But we can say something which is like this. There is a common denominator among us composers today, like the curiosity in general to reinvent the wheel every time. One could say, and of course, we could very confidently say that the future of music could lie in a large part in technology, and for instance, in the concept of immersion. Composers have also become more tech savvy, and it's more and more a part of the vocabulary of contemporary music composers. So, to approach this idea from nowadays perspective, we have a plenitude of technical solutions. So we can deal with machine learning, algorithmic composition techniques, also gamification, like what I have also used in some of my compositions. We have interactive music systems, and in general variations of mixed media solutions. Also, the audiences of nowadays are more interested or willing to accept more experimental tools and approaches to the concept of music, and that also applies to the recording techniques nowadays. So audiences don't want to be passive members of the experience, but they want to take part of it, and by providing them new kind of concert experiences, we can basically take the classical music pieces from their natural habitat and kind of expand them for outside of the realm of the regular concert house. So basically, what we are dealing with nowadays is that we want to extend the limits of what is possible in general, both instrumentally and with technical solutions. We also want to expand the capabilities of the musicians, but also kind of also to enhance the listener's experience. So, as we all okay. I think we should probably get a little bit forward here. We pretty much covered this. I would say that we would now go to Die Raben. So maybe Hans-Peter takes over from here to tell us about our case study example.
Yeah, the Ravens is a composition made by Maria. Whose recording process kind of try to take into account these doctrines of Zukunftsmusik. Specifically, the Ravens was recorded and is presented in two versions. The first one, named or titled The Ravens 360, accounts for a traditional immersive format by presenting a 360-degree video in 3D, and also offering a spatial audio track for playback and control along the rotational axis, that is in 3 degrees of freedom. So we are utilizing here basically 360 degrees equirectangular formats with an third order ambisonic soundtrack. The footage is highly comparable with established content delivery platforms like, for example, YouTube. But we also wanted to push the envelope further and take into account the participative nature of Zukunftsmusik as it was proposed by Schumann. Thus, we went further by creating a second version titled The Ravens VR, which exploits a 6 degrees of freedom paradigm by adding translational movement to the feature set detailed earlier. So this allows us for a completely interactive experience in which users can roam freely inside the virtual environment. And rather than just to talk about it, I try to show it to you. So this is the traditional 360 version. Basically, with titles introducing us to the setting. The composition is based on a poem which is presented first by our pianist. When moving forward, we are being shown there are different perspectives at play. And while this may not seem special, in this particular version we can actually switch between perspectives interactively. In this way you gain different kind of views on the performer's action, but also the audience hall per se, which in this case was the Mozarteum, the Bösendorfer Saale Mozarteum. Alright, so much for that. This is our third perspective. Also audio changes accordingly. Due to format compatibility issues, YouTube currently only accepts first order ambisonics, in other words a 4-channel sound file, but this gives us remarkable spatial resolution, not as good as the original formats of third order ambisonics, but nonetheless acceptable. Now, while this is still a somewhat linear experience, even though three-dimensional and so on, but the level of interaction is somewhat limited. That means you can only switch between these different camera positions and perhaps also audio positions. But what you nevertheless cannot do is move freely in that room. And that's what we try to account for. And let's move forward here to our next example. And we did that with the 6 degrees of freedom version of the Ravens, as you will be seeing here in a second. So we are here again in our main camera perspective, but we can now move freely in the room. Thanks to using depth maps, it's possible to provide the software with the set depth information and create displacement maps that later than in our custom Unity player allow us to displace vertices. Whereas the movements that I'm doing right now maybe seem a bit extreme, but they are particularly useful if you actually wear a headset, a VR headset, and you trigger a little bit, you move a step or just on the sides and so on. It provides you or the user a certain level of freedom, but if he or she chooses to do so, they can also move in the room and explore its borders, its actions, and at the same time enables us to take a unique look at our performer and the piano, as can be seen here. As you can tell, we are nonetheless dealing with quite a deal of artifacts here. Unfortunately, this is in the nature of making such recordings, as we are lacking any kind of three-dimensional texture information. But nonetheless, it provides us with a certain level of experience of being able to move behind the piano and taking a look inside the strings, moving along here. we can take a look behind the pianist, taking a look at how she's, or observing her, how she is performing one of the strings, and later then moving on to the keys, and so on. We can move back, much further back than originally planned, than the original position had indicated to us.
And the audio also changes all the time.
Exactly. The audio will become more reverberant, and different mixes are going to be taken into account here.
Like you would be actually inside the concert hall yourself.
And this provides us with the option to enable users a certain level of interaction with the performer, or not only with the performer, but with the music per se. Our intention was to simulate situational context, actually, as we may have found it in the implications of the Zukunftsmusik doctrines, which were specifically focused on providing a limited set of a certain set of perspectives that could be manipulated by the user. So in that sense, we want to combine both a level of corporal co-articulation and embodiment into artistic recording and an experience that kind of tries to account for these desiderata brought forward by the Zukunftsmusik movement. So we argue that the commonality between these two refers to the quantitative co-creation of a simulation of alternate or suggested realities. And that's the times that we live in, folks. We love virtual reality. We may be moving even more in that direction, considering how much we are experiencing right now limiting factors due to this whole COVID crisis. And we hope that is our contribution to making life a little bit more bearable and closer to the original idea of what was the Gesamtkunstwerk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting, and the VR, I guess, was very apt in this pandemic with a sadly empty concert hall.
Yes.
But perhaps in the future we'll have VR with a full concert hall, which will be wonderful next year, we hope.
Indeed, yes, that certainly would be very desirable again. But for now, unfortunately, we have to rely on a more sterile place.
Yes,
However, there is also a good thing about this VR technologies and VR audio, because this way, we can take the concert hall experience outside of the concert hall. So, because that's actually the weakness of classical music nowadays, that it's only for a limited audience. So those who actually happen to be in the physical concert hall. However, with this kind of realizations, we can get much more audiences for concert music pieces that necessarily wouldn't be known by so many people otherwise.
Moreover, when Wagner or Schumann refer to perspective, what they actually also meant was providing perspective to an artistic work that go beyond the usual audience perspective. So we can provide this in VR by bringing audiences closer to the performer or whatever stage act is currently on, and at the same time move along axes that they otherwise would not be able to explore. And at the same time, if they wish so, they can move back into a safe place of their audience chair.
We have a couple of questions on the chat. We're running out of time, but you can look at them later if needed. So there's one from Javier. I don't know if you can read them, but he wonders whether there's any compromises or what are the challenges behind audiences who might not be trained in knowing where, if there is any best place to stand to get the best experience.
Yes, I think that's a very good question, actually. An issue that we're encountering in VR production and video production in general. But particularly in this case, we actually want people to be somewhat disoriented and actually find their way through this environment while they're experiencing the piece as well. So the point is to provide a reference of exploration of the concert situation at the same time. Similarly, like a performer would do it when they enter a concert stage for the first time. Typically, a performer rehearses before actually giving a performance. They actually move around on the stage, they check out the piano, they look at it, they kind of try to gain a sense of the space and place. And similarly, we want to provide that kind of an experience to our users. However, what in that sense, it's an interesting point, and a better way perhaps to account for that in the future is to provide a longer orientation time frame. Partially, we planned this poem to that was in the very beginning and which I skipped for reasons of demonstrations. That poem was supposed to provide us that kind of training phase, as and exploration phase, as I might call it here, and then enable us at the same time to, or the user eventually, to get a better sense of the space and then place and respond to it in a more appropriate manner.
Right. Well, thank you. I think we're running out of time. There's another question.